will you send my friend out here? And out walks Dean. And I just looked up to heaven and said, "Dear God, give me something to say."
For decades, the Rat Pack's charm and charisma have captivated the world. But behind the glitz and glamour, there are stories yet to be told. Now, Ernest Borgnine, one of Hollywood's most beloved icons, has decided to break his silence on the enigmatic Dean Martin. What was Martin really like behind the suave persona? Were there secrets only Borgnine knew? Prepare to uncover the untold truths about a friendship that shaped an era of Hollywood like no other. This revelation promises to change everything you thought you knew about the King of Cool. Ernest Borgnine and Dean Martin's relationship was a fascinating one. Borgnine, a brilliant actor, was on the set of From Here to Eternity, an epic movie. He probably thought it was going to be a musical because Frank Sinatra was in it. During filming, he ran into Dean Martin, and this encounter stuck with him forever. Borgnine recalled walking off the set when Dean Martin came on stage and said to the audience, "Now there's an actor." Right then and there, it hit him, this wasn't just some random compliment. Dean Martin meant it. Now, let's rewind a bit. Who was Dean Martin anyway? Born Dino Paul Crocetti, this kid from Ohio had a rough start. He spoke Italian at home and struggled to learn English in school, eventually dropping out. Can you believe it? But sometimes, the best stories come from those who break the rules. He tried everything, boxing, bootlegging, you name it. He even called himself Kid Crochet in the boxing ring. Finally, he found his groove in music. He started singing, got noticed, and was on his way. Then World War II hit, and he got drafted, but was thankfully discharged early, allowing him to jump back into show business. And that's where Jerry Lewis comes in. Dean Martin, the smooth operator, met Jerry Lewis, the wild-card comedian, at a nightclub, and sparks flew. They became an iconic duo, and the rest, as they say, is history. Dean and Jerry teamed up for a musical comedy show, Dean, the smooth singer, and Jerry, the master of physical comedy. They were like fire and ice, a perfect match. Their debut at the 500 Club in Atlantic City wasn't exactly a standing ovation, the audience seemed more confused than amused. The club owner, Skinny D'Amato, even threatened to kick them out if they didn't improve. But these guys were resilient. They went back to the drawing board, and their next show was pure magic. Jerry would interrupt Dean mid-song, sending him into a hilarious chase across the stage. In another bit, Jerry dressed as a clumsy waiter, crashing Dean's performance, dropping plates, and generally wreaking havoc. The audience went wild. Their popularity exploded, soon making them the talk of the town and even landing a spot on The Ed Sullivan Show. They knew they needed to take things to the next level, so they hired top-notch writers to help craft their act. Things were looking up. They signed a lucrative radio deal with Paramount, raking in $775,000, a fortune back then. But success wasn't without its challenges. Dean and Jerry started to butt heads. Dean felt like Jerry was overshadowing him, that the focus was too much on the slapstick and not enough on the music. He wanted to explore different avenues, but their contract with Paramount tied their hands. That's when things really took a turn for the worse. The story turned into a rather tragic one. Imagine being on stage with your best friend, the crowd going wild, and then, poof, your face gets erased from the cover of a magazine. That's basically what happened to Dean Martin and his comedy partner Jerry Lewis. Their friendship took a serious hit when Dean felt entirely snubbed by Jerry. It all went down in 1954 after an over-the-top three-ring circus act. They even got a magazine spread, but guess who was mysteriously missing from the photo? Dean. Furious, he decided he'd had enough. No more Paramount. No more Jerry. He declared his independence, and when his contract finally expired, he hightailed it out of there. Everyone thought Dean was going to crash and burn. He's nothing without Jerry, they scoffed. But Dean, bless his heart, proved them all wrong. He went solo, focusing on his singing career, and boy, could he sing. That's amore, memories are made of this, everybody loves somebody, those tunes were enormous hits. But Dean wasn't content to be just a crooner. He wanted to act, to be a movie star. He tried, oh how he tried, but let's just say his early acting career was a mixed bag. Then came The Young Lions in 1958, a war movie that became a hit and suddenly put Dean back in the spotlight. He rubbed shoulders with Hollywood royalty like John Wayne and Ricky Nelson. He even got nominated for a Golden Globe. From then on, Dean was on fire. He starred in tons of movies and even produced some himself, becoming a legend, a true icon. And let's not forget the Rat Pack, Dean, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr. These guys were the ultimate party animals. They sang, they joked, and they charmed their way through every show, leaving an indelible mark on Hollywood history. Vegas never saw anything like it. Sooner the Dean Martin Show came on board, think of it as the ultimate chill TV show. Dean, looking effortlessly suave in a tux, would banter with guests, make a few off-color jokes, some might say a few too many, and generally have a good time. It was a massive hit, even though the censors at NBC were constantly on his case. Off-screen, Dean was a devoted family man. Despite his playboy image, he loved his wife and kids, and while he portrayed himself as a bit of a boozer on TV, his friends say he wasn't actually that much of a drinker. Years later, Dean and Jerry finally buried the hatchet. It was a touching moment for them. Things went smoothly after that until something tragic happened to Dean in March 1987. Poor Dean Martin, the crooner, lost his son, Dean Paul, in a plane crash. It was a real tragedy, flying with the Air National Guard and everything, and it hit Dean hard. He really spiraled, fell into a deep depression, and turned to the bottle for comfort. Frank Sinatra, a good friend of his, tried to cheer him up by taking him on tour, but it was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Dean was glued to his bottle, and that cigarette never left his lips. Speaking of cigarettes, those years of chain smoking finally caught up with him. In 1993, they told him he had lung cancer. Surgery was an option, but Dean, with his stubborn heart, wasn't having it. He retreated from the spotlight, spent time with his family, and just faded away. Sadly, he passed away on Christmas Day, 1995, at 78. The whole world mourned the loss of this legend. Even the Las Vegas Strip dimmed its lights in his honor. From a kid who dropped out of school to a global icon, he quit the journey. Now that we've discussed who Dean Martin was, let's speak about what happened between him and Borgnine. Borgnine, in his own words, gave us a glimpse into their friendship, showing us a side of Dean that went way beyond the suave image and the Rat Pack swagger. It turns out that Dino was a real pal, a loyal guy who was more than just a pretty face. Now, let's talk about Ernie. This guy, born Hermes Ephron Borgnine, had a pretty humble start. He grew up in a working-class family in Connecticut, the son of Italian immigrants. After high school, he did what any red-blooded American would do, he joined the Navy. And when World War II hit, he was right back in uniform, serving his country. After the war, Ernie was lost, unsure of what to do with his life. Ernest Borgnine wasn't precisely cut out for factory work, and it didn't take him long to realize that. Lucky for him, his mom had a sharper eye for his talents. One day, she told him, "You're always making a fool of yourself in front of people, why not get paid for it?" Most kids would roll their eyes, but Ernest had an epiphany. Sitting at the kitchen table, he suddenly felt like a light bulb went off in his head, and 10 years later, Grace Kelly was handing him an Oscar. He got his start at the Randall School of Drama in Hartford, then joined the Barter Theater in Virginia. This place was a gem, it let people trade things like apples and eggs for tickets back during the Great Depression. His first role came in 1947 with State of the Union. It wasn't a big part, but the audience loved him. He kept the momentum going with The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams, playing the gentleman caller and proving he could bring the drama. By 1949, he was ready for the Big Apple. He made his Broadway debut in Harvey as a nurse, of all things, and then came TV. His first gig was on Captain Video and his Video Rangers. It sounds campy, right? But it opened the floodgates. He popped up everywhere: Goodyear Television Playhouse, Laramie, Fireside Theater, you name it, he was on it. Hollywood came calling soon enough, and he got his first film role in The Whistle at Eaton Falls in 1951. But his big break was playing the nasty Sergeant Fatso Judson in From Here to Eternity. Critics raved, the film won Best Picture, and Ernest was officially on the map. Now, Borgnine wasn't afraid to play the bad guy. He had a string of villain roles in films like Johnny Guitar and Vera Cruz, but 1955 was his year. He starred in Marty as a shy, lovable butcher, and the world fell in love with him. The film cleaned up at Cannes, and Borgnine beat out heavyweights like Frank Sinatra and James Dean for the Oscar. He even took home a Golden Globe and a BAFTA. Talk about a glow-up from his Captain Video days. Then came TV stardom. In 1962, he signed on Fort McHale's Navy, a World War II sitcom about a ragtag crew of troublemakers. Ernest played Quentin McHale, the gruff but lovable skipper who somehow managed to keep his misfit crew in line. The show was an instant hit, landing in the top 30 in its first season. Fans adored him, and he even snagged an Emmy nomination. But after 4 seasons, the jokes started feeling a little stale, and the show ended in 1966. Borgnine's career didn't slow down, though. Over the next 3 decades, he was everywhere. He took on big-screen roles in The Dirty Dozen, The Poseidon Adventure, and Escape from New York. He even played Dutch in The Wild Bunch, a western that packed a moral punch. Borgnine later said, "Every picture should have a moral." Back in the day, the bad guys always got what was coming to them. Now it seems like they're running the show. Preach, Ernie. And TV? Oh, he dominated that too. Little House on the Prairie, Magnum P.I., The Love Boat, Touched by an Angel. You couldn't flip through channels without seeing his face. After that, Borgnine became Hollywood's go-to guy for, well, everything, westerns, dramas, comedies, you name it, he nailed it. Even in his later years, he kept working, showing up in the final episodes of ER like the absolute legend he was. Ernest Borgnine's career was nothing short of legendary, and he never seemed to slow down. In 1983, he was back at Universal Studios, co-starring with Jan Michael Vincent in the hit TV show Airwolf. Producer Donald P. Belisario personally invited him after seeing him wrestle in a 1982 episode of Magnum P.I. Borgnine immediately said yes and took on the role of Dominic Santini, a lovable helicopter pilot. The show was a big success, but behind the scenes, Borgnine was working himself to the bone. The grueling schedule and wrangling with his younger co-star could have exhausted anyone. CBS pulled the plug on the show in 1986, giving Borgnine a well-deserved break, or so you'd think. Fast forward to 1989, when Borgnine was off to Namibia to film Laser Mission with Brandon Lee. The movie came out in 1990, and though it didn't bring home any Oscars, by 1995 he was back on TV in The Single Guy, playing Manny Cordoba, the world's most lovable doorman. Co-star Jonathan Silverman joked that Borgnine had more energy than the entire cast combined, first on set, last to leave, and probably cracking jokes in between takes. In 1996, Borgnine showed his adventurous side in Merlin's Shop of Mystical Wonders. In this quirky fantasy film, he narrated a story about a cursed cymbal-banging monkey toy stolen from Merlin. Yes, really. The movie didn't take off at first but eventually gained a cult following after being hilariously roasted on Mystery Science Theater 3000. That same year, Borgnine hopped on a bus and toured the US to meet fans and see the country. His journey became the subject of a 1997 documentary, Ernest Borgnine on the Bus. Oh, and in between all this, he found time to visit VA hospitals as part of the National Salute to Hospitalized Veterans. By 1997, Borgnine was back in uniform. He played Rear Admiral Quinton McHale in McHale's Navy, passing the torch and the name to Tom Arnold, who played his son. A year later, he popped up in the comedy B.A. Secondball as a wealthy entrepreneur who was equally ridiculous and entertaining. Then came his most iconic late-career role, Mermaid Man in SpongeBob SquarePants. Paired with McHale's Navy buddy Tim Conway as Barnacle Boy, Borgnine completely embraced his role as a retired superhero. Kids loved him, and honestly, so did adults. After his passing, Nickelodeon paid tribute by airing all his Mermaid Man episodes, which was just the sweetest thing. But Borgnine didn't stop there. In 2007, he starred in the Hallmark movie A Grandpa for Christmas. The heartwarming story of an estranged grandfather bonding with his granddaughter earned him a Golden Globe nomination at 90 years old, making him the oldest nominee ever. Meanwhile, he also found time to write his autobiography, Ernie, which was less a serious memoir and more a collection of amazing stories shared like old friends catching up. In 2009, Borgnine appeared in the final season of ER, breaking hearts as a husband watching his wife pass away. His performance was so moving it earned him an Emmy nomination, his first in nearly 30 years. That same year, at 92, he starred in another Harvest Moon, proving age was just a number to him. He wrapped up his film career in style. In 2010, he had a fun cameo on Saturday Night Live with Morgan Freeman, appeared in the action movie Red, and finished his final film, The Man Who Shook the Hand of Vicente Fernandez, in 2011. Borgnine stayed busy, stayed charming, and never lost his sense of humor or his love for his fans. If anyone ever earned the title of Unstoppable, it was Ernest Borgnine. Borgnine and Martin, two legends, two wildly different paths, but both icons in their own right. Now, here's where it gets good. Actor Ernest Borgnine shared a story that perfectly sums up Dean's charm. After finishing a scene on set, Borgnine overheard Martin point to him and say, "Now there's an actor." Think about it, Dean Martin, the king of cool, casually handing you a compliment like it's no big deal. Borgnine was floored. He already admired Dean, but hearing that kind of praise? Let's just say it made his week, maybe his year. Borgnine later described Dean as the most wonderful man and gushed about how easy it was to click with him. Their instant bond turned into a lasting friendship. And here's the thing about Dean, he wasn't the kind of guy to hog the spotlight. Despite his megastar status, he lifted others. So while Hollywood is often a battlefield of egos and competition, Dean was the guy showing everyone how it's done with a wink, a drink, and an aptitude for making people feel like $1,000,000. Let's raise a glass to that. Ernest Borgnine's memories of Dean Martin give us more than just Hollywood anecdotes, they're proof that a few kind words and some genuine heart can change a life. Borgnine had a front-row seat to the honest Dean Martin, and he was way more than just the smooth-talking, martini-sipping icon we saw on screen. Sure, Martin oozed cool, but underneath that suave persona was a guy who was all heart, humility, and, hilariously enough, as grounded as your neighbor who still mows their lawn. Borgnine loved to talk about how Dean wasn't just another celebrity lost in the glitz. This guy was the real deal. He had a way of making you feel like you mattered. His kindness wasn't a show, it was who he was. And let's not forget, the man was generous to a fault. Do you need advice, a laugh, or just someone to have your back? Dean was your guy. And let's not forget the humor. Martin could crack a joke so sharp it could cut through the toughest of times. Borgnine would often share how Dean's wit was like the glue that held their friendship together. If you were going through life's ups and downs, he was the perfect person to make even the worst day feel a little less terrible. But behind that constant smile was a man who carried his struggles he rarely let anyone see. Only a few, like Borgnine, got to know that side of him, a sign of just how close their bond really was. Dean's superpower wasn't just his talent, it was his ability to stay human when everything around him screamed celebrity. Fans adored him, and peers respected him, but it was his kindness that truly defined him. Borgnine saw all of it, the glamour, the humility, and the occasional moment where Martin would surprise you by being just a regular guy with a big heart. That friendship between Borgnine and Martin wasn't just one of those Hollywood we work together so we're friends deals. This was the real thing. Borgnine was the hardworking guy who took everything seriously, and Martin was effortless cool personified. They couldn't have been more different, yet somehow they made it work. Their bond wasn't just built to last, it was built on trust, laughter, and the kind of authenticity that's rare even outside of Hollywood. In the end, Borgnine's stories remind us that beneath all the fame, Martin was just a guy who knew how to be a great friend, a decent human, and someone we all wish we could have shared a drink with. Borgnine and Martin had the kind of friendship you don't see every day, especially in Hollywood. They stuck together through the highs, the lows, and everything in between. When Martin faced the unimaginable tragedy of losing his son, Dean Paul Jr., in a plane crash, Borgnine was right there, not with empty words, but with the kind of support that really matters. He didn't try to fix it or toss out cliches, he just showed up, probably with a firm shoulder and maybe a bottle of something substantial, because sometimes that's what friends do. And it wasn't a one-way street. When Borgnine hit career slumps or had those "am I even good at this" moments we all have, Martin was his cheerleader. Well, maybe not with pom-poms and cartwheels, but he'd call, visit, and remind Borgnine how talented he was and how much he meant to everyone who knew him. Basically, he was the guy who'd shake you by the shoulders and say, "Snap out of it, you're amazing." But their friendship wasn't just about serious stuff. These two knew how to laugh, like really laugh. Whether they were on set or chasing golf, they loved the simple joys of hanging out. Their banter could have been its own comedy show, and you can bet they made life on set a lot more entertaining for everyone around. What made their bond so special was how real it was. They saw through the Hollywood glitz and focused on who the other person really was. No ego, no fake smiles, just two guys who genuinely cared about each other. In a world full of photo ops and surface-level connections, their friendship was as rare as finding a clean car in LA after it rains. Borgnine and Martin's relationship is a reminder that even if you're surrounded by fame and fortune, it's the people who stand by you through thick and thin who truly matter. Because when life throws its worst at you, or even just a bad round of golf, you need someone who's got your back, your jokes, and maybe even the tab at dinner.